Hi, this is Roland of Making Sound Machines with Enrica on the soldering iron. And we're building the new Plinky kit from mmalex. When you ordered your Plinky kit, you have probably by now received a big box of parts from Thonk. We will walk you through the building process step by step and show you everything you need to successfully build your Plinky. So let's have a quick look what's in the box. We've got the pin headers, 2 pin sockets. We've got the washers for encoders and pots, and the hex nuts. We've got 1 encoder, 2 potentiometers, 1 Eurorack Power pin header. We've got 4 headphone line-in jacks, 16 hex nuts for the Thonkiconn. We've got 13 black Thonkiconn and 3 green Thonkiconn. We've got 3 caps. We've got black screws, 4 rubber feet, 4 standoffs. We've got the OLED screen and pin header. We've got surface mount LEDs, and you'll find the blue LEDs in the short strip. The Eurorack Power cable. We've got the main board, the front panel, and the back panel. And then we have the aluminum case, which is optional, and if you want one, you will have to get it from Thonk. So here are some tools you need to build this. Some perf board, which is optional, but really helpful for the pin headers. Thick solder. Snipe nose pliers. Thin solder. Flat nose pliers, tweezers, and a soldering iron. The first step is to remove the PCB assembly rails if they are present. You may find that your board has 2 5mm rails on its left and right sides. These are a side effect of the manufacturing process, and they are pre-scored to make them easy to remove. You can gently snap them off and throw them away if they are there. The next step is soldering the headphone and line-in ports. Start by placing and soldering in the stereo jack sockets. Make sure they are flush to the board before soldering them, especially if you have an aluminum or 3D printed case. They go in pairs either side of the USB ports, and there are 4 in total. The ones on the right are for headphones, and the ones on the left are for line in. Next up is securing the USB ports. You need to solder the through-hole parts of the two USB connectors between the jacks that you just soldered. Plinky comes with the USB ports pre-mounted on the top side, but they also have pins that need soldering from the bottom to secure them firmly to the board. They don't need a massive amount of solder, just make it secure. Next up are the two interboard connectors. You need to solder the two 8x2 pin sockets at the top of the board, where it says fingers and thumbs. Again, make sure they are flush when soldering. Now comes the Eurorack Power header. The Eurorack Power connector goes into the board where it says Europe. Do not put it in the footprint next to the hole. That's for a future expansion and can be left unpopulated. Now comes trimming the pin headers. We need to trim about 1 mm off all the pins of these 2x8 pin headers. Sadly, they make them a bit too long. A good way to do it evenly is, if you have old stripboard lying around, to stack 3 layers and poke them through. That leaves just the right amount poking through to be cut flush with side cutters. If you don't have any spare Vero board, you can do it by eye. You want to trim about 0.5 to 1 mm off each pin. The goal is for the splayed leg on the pin sockets to end up at the right height to meet neatly with the front panel, at the same height as the other components, pots, sockets, etc. Wear eye protection when trimming the headers. You do not want the tiny bits of off-cut metal going in your eyes or anyone else's. Now, on to preparing the OLED screen. Take the 4 pins for the OLED screen and slide the little plastic insulation up a tiny bit with your fingers so that when placed onto the OLED board, the pins just go through the hole and are flush on the top side. We want to maximize the length of the pins under the display. solder them in place onto the OLED from the top side. Again, make sure they are flush and perpendicular to the display. Placing the sockets and ports. Now, place the two ports and encoder in between the pin headers, but do not solder them yet. Do the two potentiometers first, as they are trickiest to place. You may need to squidge the outer legs a little to make them fit. Be gentle, as the three pins may bend easily if you don't line them up with the holes. Take care to place the three light green jack sockets in the right spots marked green. The other 13 are black. Take the trimmed pin headers, turn them upside down and push them into the sockets you soldered. There might still be 1 mm of bare metal visible between pin header insulation and socket. That's fine. Now, loosely slot the display into its position so that it sits on top of the headphone jacks and USB socket at the top of the board. Note that the sockets, display and other elements are still not soldered in. Place the front panel over all the pots and jack sockets so that everything is lined up. Screw a couple of nuts onto the Thonk sockets to hold things in place. Pull the encoder a little out from the board to equalize its shaft length with the two potentiometers as much as possible. Although it works flush too, pull it out as far as you can while still leaving enough of the pins to solder from the bottom side. Turn it all upside down and balance it on something so that it's kept a tight sandwich while you are soldering everything from the underside. It's important everything is as tightly sandwiched as possible so that it fits into the case. Solder the display last, making sure that it is at a nice square angle lined up with the front panel's hole and flush with the front panel. Its 4 pins will only just make it through the holes on the green main board. Once it's perfect, solder them. While you still have everything sandwiched together, the last thing to solder are the splayed pin headers that should just be touching the front panel, like this. It's a bit fiddly, but by doing it this way, you can be sure it all lines up nicely. Check the sandwich is tight. If the pins are holding the board and front panel too far apart, it means you didn't trim enough of the pins in the earlier step. If the pins are floating off the front panel, pull them out of the socket slightly until they are flush with the front panel. You'll only be able to solder the visible 8 pins on each side. There are 8 more on the inside of the sandwich, but we'll do them next. Finishing the connectors on the front panel. You need to prise the front panel of your newly soldered Plinky apart. Do this carefully and gradually. The pins are quite stiff. Work it slowly bit by bit, alternating both sides. Now you can solder the remaining pins on the inside of the front panel, 8 on each side. If you have reached this point, I have good news for you. Mainboard is done! So congratulations, you have completed the main board. All that remains are the LEDs. So next up is preparing all the LED pads. The first thing to do is prepare the front panel board with solder. First, put a tiny blob of solder onto one pad of each of the 72 LED footprints. Do one pad of each pair, and then one pad of each of the bottom row. You don't need a lot of solder, and for this we use the thin solder, just a tiny blob. It should look like little pillows of solder, like this, when you're done. The LEDs come packaged in little strips. There are 8 blue ones for the bottom row, so this is the short strip, and 64 white ones for the top. This is the long strip. So let's do the 8 blue ones first. Carefully pull off the clear plastic cover and empty them into a dish or a clear bit of your desk. Watch out, they are super easy to lose as they weigh next to nothing. Using tweezers, plop the blue LEDs into the holes along the bottom row, the horizontal ones marked D65 to D72. Make sure the little green pixel art triangle on the LEDs is visible and pointing in the same direction as the triangle on the silk screen. The little plastic lens of the LED sits inside the pre-drilled holes, which really helps to line it up. It should look like this. Now, with your tweezers in one hand, press gently with the tweezers onto an LED in the middle where the green triangle is, and with your other hand touch the soldering iron onto the metal pillow of solder. The solder should melt and the LED will click down flat to the board. Now, using a small amount of solder with your iron, solder the free end of each LED down. Next up is soldering the rest of the LEDs. You are now an SMD soldering expert. Now all that remains is to repeat these steps for the 64 white LEDs. They come packed as 2 strips of 33, so you have 2 spare. Take care of orientation. The pixel art green arrow should match the triangles on the board silkscreen. The 8 columns of 8 LEDs alternate in direction, so triple check again. It's much harder to unsolder than it is to solder, so double check. It takes around half an hour to do them all, so put some music on and chill. Your Plinky is nearly ready. Now you just need to squish the sandwich back together, screw on the hex nuts to secure it in place, and add the 3 knobs. The easiest way to double check whether all your LEDs are soldered correctly is to put the front panel back on and power cycle once using either USB or Eurorack Power. Don't use the 2 at once. You hold the encoder, then power the Plinky, and your Plinky should go into bootloader mode. You will see the tunnel of LEDs. Check that every light is working. If not, you may need to touch up your soldering. The simplest case option is installing your Plinky into Eurorack. You take the Plinky, install the power cable, and screw it into your Eurorack like you would any other module. Making the pocket operator style case. You can use 4 15mm hex spacers along with 8 M3 bolts to hold Plinky together into a nice pocket operator style open case. Screw the spacers into the base plate using M3 bolts and then screw Plinky into them from above. Take a moment to appreciate the majesty of your crafting skills. You can also purchase a custom-made aluminum case from Thonk. It is very nice but not required. You insert your Plinky at an angle, then click it down so the front panel sits snug on the case. Using M3 bolts, screw the Plinky into the case from above. Congratulations! The hardware part is done. Now all that's left is software and calibration. Next is installing the latest firmware. With Plinky powered off, hold down the encoder, and while still held down, plug it into a PC or Mac USB port. If you've got it right, you'll see a tunnel of flashing lights on the main board. This is Plinky's special USB upgrade mode. Your PC should have made a little noise indicating that a new device is plugged in, and it should show up as a USB drive. Drag and drop the latest firmware file, which should have .uf2 extension, and which you can download from plinkysynth.com onto the Plinky USB drive. The lights will flicker, and that's all there is to it. Your Plinky now has the latest software. Click the encoder to finish the upgrade process. Next up is touch calibration. In calibration mode, one LED in each column will be lit. Press your finger evenly and as centrally as possible on one of the lit pads, mezzo forte, medium hard, for a few seconds. After a few seconds, it will start blinking and you can release. Plinky will ask you to do this for all 72 pads by lighting them in turn. Once you've finished, your Plinky is ready to play. Congratulations, it's done! Happy plinking! Detailed instructions and videos can be found at plinkysynth.com.